Hello and welcome back to our Chanel Learn Room. Today we are opening up a massive case file on a subject that, well, you almost certainly think you already know everything about.
Yeah, but we are leaving all those Hollywood narratives and pop culture myths completely at the door today.
Exactly. We're explicitly adopting the role of neutral reporters for this deep dive. Our mission is an impartial, totally fact-based investigation into the historical documents, the metallurgical science, and even modern academic papers on dark heritage tourism.
Right, because we are looking at the RMS Titanic not just as a tragedy, but as a massive engineering marvel of its time. It's a metallurgical mystery, a catalyst for modern maritime law, and honestly, a complex ethical dilemma.
Yeah, especially regarding who owns a tragedy in the modern era of dark tourism. So to you listening, while everyone thinks they know the Titanic story, we're going to look at microscopic evidence, like slag in the rivets, and macroethical questions that you probably haven't considered.
And we're presenting all these facts and competing viewpoints completely objectively without expressing any of our own personal opinions.
Right, so to really understand why the ship sank, we first have to impartially report on why and how it was built in the first place. I mean, we have to look at the massive business pressures of the early 20th century.
Yeah, the corporate rivalry back then was intense. The White Star Line had actually gone bankrupt years prior, and then they were resurrected.
Right, and eventually backed by J.P. Morgan's IMM Shipping Trust, right?
Exactly,
Right.
under the leadership of J. Bruce Ismay. And they were fiercely competing with the Cunard Line.
Because Cunard had the fastest ships in the world at the time, the Mauretania and the Lusitania.
They did, so White Star made a calculated choice. They decided to compete on sheer size and luxury rather than speed.
Which is fascinating. I mean, they basically said, we can't beat you in a race, so we'll just build a floating palace.
Right, and to ensure a smoother ride, they actually used a different, somewhat older propeller design. The massive reciprocating engines caused way less vibration than the high-speed turbines Cunard was using.
So it was all about giving the wealthy passengers the most comfortable experience possible. But building a ship that size required an incredible scale of construction.
Oh, absolutely. It was built by Harland and Wolff in Belfast, Ireland, and they employed roughly 15,000 workers.
15,000. That is just a staggering number of people for one project.
It really is, and we have to note the human cost of just building the ship. The safety standards back then were practically non-existent.
Right. The historical records show 246 injuries during construction, and 28 of those were severe, like, severed arms and crushed legs.
Yeah, and tragically, 8 deaths occurred just during the physical construction of the ship.
Which makes the whole unsinkable hubris thing seem even more tragic. But it wasn't just blind arrogance, was it?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to understand the mindset of the era. This confidence was actually based on very recent maritime history.
Like what happened in 1907.
Right. In 1907, the German liner SS Kronprinz Wilhelm rammed an iceberg head-on. It completely crushed its bow, but the ship easily survived and made it to port.
Oh, wow. So they literally had hard data suggesting these modern steel ships could take a massive hit.
Exactly. Even Captain Edward Smith stated in 1907 that he couldn't imagine any condition causing a modern ship to founder. They truly believed the watertight compartments had solved the problem of sinking.
Okay, let's unpack this. If they had watertight compartments, why was the design ultimately fatal?
Well, the ship had these massive transverse bulkheads, basically steel walls dividing the lower hull into 16 compartments.
But they didn't go all the way up, right? It's kind of like an ice cube tray.
That's a perfect analogy, yeah. The compartments were heavily reinforced on the sides and bottom, but they weren't capped at the top.
So once the iceberg scraped the side and opened 6 compartments, the water rushed in, and the weight pulled the front of the ship down.
Exactly. And once it tipped forward, the water just cascaded over the top of the bulkheads from one compartment to the next.
Just like water spilling over the dividers in an ice cube tray when you tilt it. So the design was flawed, but what about the physical materials?
Right. Did the steel itself fail? To answer that, we transitioned to the laboratory, specifically looking at the 1991 and 1996 steel recoveries.
Yeah, scientists like Dr. Phil Laley and Tim Folk tested this steel, and we're looking at their NIST-I 6118 report for this.
And their chemical analysis of the hull steel, which was made using the Siemens-Martin formula, is really revealing.
It had a very low manganese to carbon ratio, didn't it? Like 1.5 to 2?
Yeah, whereas modern steel has a ratio of about 5. And the Titanic steel also had very high levels of sulfur and phosphorus.
And what does that mean for the metal in freezing water?
Well, they ran these things called Sharpie V-notch impact tests to find the ductile to brittle transition temperature.
Basically finding the exact temperature where the metal stops bending and just shatters instead.
Precisely. Modern A36 steel transitions at minus 15 degrees Celsius.
But the Titanic steel transitioned between positive 40 and positive 70 degrees Celsius. That's like room temperature.
Yeah, and the ocean that night was minus 2 degrees Celsius.
It's like freezing a candy bar. Like at room temperature, it bends and stretches, which is ductile. But if you freeze it, it just snaps cleanly in half.
That's exactly how the steel behaved. When it hit the iceberg, the steel shattered like glass instead of denting.
But we have to be impartial here. Was this negligence by the shipbuilders?
Impartially speaking, no. The steel met the strict 1906 standards, which allowed for 0.04% sulfur.
So they were following the rules of the time.
Exactly. Metallurgists didn't fully understand notch sensitivity until we saw the Liberty ship failures in World War II.
So the steel was brittle. But what about the rivets holding the plates together? I mean, they used 3 million wrought iron rivets.
And wrought iron normally has about 2 to 3% slag, which is iron silicate inside it.
But the NIST report found that the Titanic's rivets had 9.3% slag. That is a massive difference.
It is. What's fascinating here is the orientation of that slag. It was oriented perpendicular to the tensile axis.
Wait, what does that mean in plain English?
When the workers hammered the inner head of the rivet to form it, the glassy slag spread out sideways. It created a massive weak point right at the head.
So when the iceberg hit, the pressure just popped the rivet heads right off.
Exactly. The seams parted. There wasn't this massive 300-foot continuous gash like the movies show.
It was just a separation of the plates. And speed played a huge role in this too, right? Strain rate sensitivity.
Yeah, if you compare this to the RMS Olympic's collision with the HMS Hawk in 1911.
The Olympic was going much slower, right?
Yes, and because it was a slower collision, the plates bent and deformed. But the Titanic was going 22 knots into an iceberg.
So that high speed basically turned the impact into a giant Sharpie test. The plates fractured instead of bending.
Precisely. So you have brittle steel, highly slagged rivets, and a speed of 22 knots in minus 2-degree water.
The physical stage for disaster is completely set. Which brings us to the human decisions on April 14th, 1912.
Right. Neutrally reporting the timeline, they received 7 distinct ice warnings that day from ships like the Masaba and the Caronia.
7 warnings. But they maintained that speed of 22 knots anyway?
Because timekeeping was absolutely paramount for North Atlantic liners. And those ice warnings were treated as mere advisories, not strict orders to stop.
Which leads right to 11:40 p.m. Look out. Frederick Fleet spots the iceberg and gives the warning.
And First Officer Murdoch attempts to reverse the engines and turn the wheel hard to starboard.
But that combination was fatal because of the ship's massive size and its relatively small rudder.
Exactly. By reversing the engines, he severely reduced the water flow over that small rudder, killing their turning ability.
So the starboard plates buckle, the rivet heads pop, and 6 compartments are open to the sea.
Which immediately triggers the lifeboat dilemma. The ship could technically carry 3,300 people.
But it only had lifeboats for 1,178 people, which was only about half the people actually on board.
Here's where it gets really interesting. That number actually exceeded the British Board of Trade requirements.
Wait, really? How could having boats for only half the passengers be completely legal?
Because the law was hopelessly outdated. It was written in 1894, and it capped out at ships of 10,000 tons.
But the Titanic was over 46,000 tons. So the regulations simply hadn't caught up to the engineering.
Exactly. The law never imagined ships getting that massive.
That is just a tragic bureaucratic failure. So moving to the final moments, between 2:10 a.m. and 2:20 a.m.
Right, the water is pouring in, and the ship experiences a total electrical failure.
And the physical forces on the keel become unimaginable. The ship actually broke in two between the third and fourth funnels.
Which is something the surviving officers completely denied during the inquiries. They claimed it sank intact.
But it was eventually confirmed when they found the wreck in 1985. So up to 1,635 people died. How did the world react?
It sent shockwaves globally. And it immediately triggered massive public inquiries in both the U.S. and Britain.
And reporting on those findings objectively, neither IMM nor White Star was actually found negligent.
That's right. It was officially ruled an act of God because Captain Smith was simply following long-standing industry practices.
So no one was legally blamed. But Lord Mersey, who led the British inquiry, did issue a pretty stern warning.
He did. He stated that what was considered a standard mistake for the Titanic would absolutely be considered negligence in the future.
And that sparked sweeping global changes to maritime law, like the creation of SOLAS in 1914.
Safety of life at sea. It mandated lifeboats for every single person on board.
And the U.S. passed the Radio Act of 1912, requiring 24-hour radio watches and secondary power supplies.
They also established priority for distress calls and standardized the use of distress flares.
Plus, the U.S. Coast Guard formed the International Ice Patrol. And this statistic is incredible. There's been no loss of life or property due to icebergs in their patrol areas since it started.
It's a phenomenal success rate. And ship designs changed too. True watertight compartmentalization, gate valves, double hulls.
And much larger rudders.
Mm-hmm.
So the laws on the surface changed completely, but the ship itself sat undiscovered in the dark for 73 years.
Right, which brings us to the 1985 discovery by Robert Ballard and Jean-Louis Michel.
But Ballard's search was actually a cover story, wasn't it?
It was. This raises an important question. How do you find a needle in a 15-square-mile haystack?
Especially under 5,300 psi of pressure at 12,500 feet down.
Well, Ballard used the search for two sunken nuclear submarines, the Thresher and the Scorpion, as a testing ground.
So he was on a classified Navy mission first.
Exactly. And he learned that using sonar to find a hull was incredibly difficult. Instead, he learned to track the massive debris fields using cameras.
Right, using a camera sled called Argo. He looked for the trail of objects instead of the ship itself.
And that's exactly how he found the Titanic's boilers in 1985. But finding it revealed a shocking biological reality.
Yeah, everyone thought it would be preserved in this sterile deep freeze environment.
But instead, it's a thriving ecosystem. They discovered Halomonas titanicae, which is a previously unknown rust-eating bacteria.
And this bacteria is literally consuming the iron and creating these massive rustical formations all over the wreck.
Henrietta Mann, a researcher who studied this, estimates the wreck could collapse entirely by the 2030s.
It's just dissolving into an oasis in the deep-sea desert. But before we realized it was decaying so fast, people had some wild ideas about salvaging it.
Oh, absolutely. Impartially recounting these historical proposals, they are pretty bizarre.
Like the plan to fill the hull with millions of ping pong balls to float it to the surface.
Or injecting 180,000 tons of Vaseline into it.
And my favorite, using liquid nitrogen to freeze the water around it and turn the Titanic into a giant iceberg so it would float.
The irony of using an iceberg to save the Titanic is quite something. But in 1996, they did attempt to raise the big piece of the hull.
Yeah, and the cable snapped, and it fell 12,000 feet back to the bottom, though they did successfully retrieve it in 1998.
Which naturally leads us to the ethics of all this. The ability to reach the wreck created a massive controversy over who owns it.
Right, and this transitions into the modern academic concept of dark heritage.
So, reporting strictly neutrally on this, there are two main camps. First, you have the conservationists, like RMS Titanic Inc.
And they believe that because the bacteria is eating the ship, artifacts should be recovered, preserved, and displayed before they are lost forever.
Exactly. But then you have the protectionists, championed by people like Robert Ballard.
And they view the site fundamentally as a mass grave. They believe it should be left completely untouched out of respect.
This camp heavily supported the 2001 UNESCO protection of the site to prevent commercial exploitation.
Because public fascination with sites of disaster and trauma is huge. It's the definition of dark tourism.
It is. People are drawn to sites of extreme human loss.
So what does this all mean for us today? Are these dives educational, or are they just playgrounds for the ultra-wealthy?
Well, the 2023 OceanGate expedition brought that question to the forefront. The Titan submersible imploded, killing 5 people.
Impartially looking at what sociologists say about this, it really highlights the exclusivity of these experiences.
Right, it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars just to buy a ticket.
And critics point out the commercialization of disaster sites. There's a real tension between historical integrity and profit-driven exploration.
Not to mention the modern pollution. Researchers are finding man-made trash and plastics at a depth of 12,500 feet.
Right in the middle of a 15-square-mile debris field, juxtaposed against memorial plaques. It's really sobering.
It is. So to briefly recap our journey today, We went from a Belfast shipyard through the microscopic flaws in iron and steel.
To the high-speed physics of the collision, resulting changes in international maritime law, and finally to the modern ethical dilemmas of deep-sea tourism.
It really shows that history isn't static. Our relationship with the Titanic is still actively evolving as the ship itself dissolves.
Absolutely. So we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
If the rust-eating bacteria completely erase the physical wreckage of the Titanic by 2050, as predicted,
Will our ethical debates about salvaging and dark tourism disappear with it? Or will the empty coordinates themselves remain a sacred contested monument forever?